Ingrid Bergman wasn't just one of the most luminous actresses of classic Hollywood. She was a woman who dared to live on her own terms. From a tragic childhood in Sweden to a scandal that rocked America, Bergman's life was filled with passion, controversy, and unforgettable performances. Today we take you behind the scenes of the woman who gave us Casablanca, challenged 1950s morality, and forever changed what it meant to be a leading lady. This is the extraordinary and complicated life of Ingrid Bergman. Born on August 29, 1915, in Stockholm, Sweden, Ingrid seemed almost destined to become an actress. If you can picture an old photography studio, warm lights, the smell of developer fluid, and a father coaxing a playful child to pose, then you have Ingrid's earliest memory in a nutshell. Her father, Eustace, was a talented photographer and filmmaker in his own right. He often placed her before his camera, capturing a young girl who was unknowingly rehearsing for the day when audiences worldwide would hang on her every movement. Yet these sessions were not just father-daughter bonding moments. They were subtle stepping stones toward a future in which Ingrid's face would be splashed on film posters across the globe. But Ingrid was no stranger to the darkness that life can thrust upon us. Picture a shy little girl, someone who feels perpetually out of place among her peers. That was Ingrid, after her mother died when she was only 2.5 years old. With her mother gone, the sense of solitude crept in like a silent visitor who refused to leave no matter how many bedtime stories or friendly faces tried to shoo it away. Ingrid later spoke of inventing characters to talk to, her own imaginary ensemble that provided a sense of safety and companionship when real life felt hollow. It's ironic to think that this very loneliness, this quiet world of make-believe, was training her to inhabit characters on screen. Early heartbreak can crush some people, but in Ingrid's case, it seems to have galvanized her spirit as if she were rehearsing emotional depth for roles that demanded profound sincerity. That sense of destiny was further complicated by her father's ambitions. He'd hoped she might grow up to become an opera singer, a pursuit he started by enrolling her in vocal lessons. But Ingrid's heart leaned in another direction. Music was lovely, but drama took root in her imagination. She felt the electrical charge of slipping into different personas, trading the everyday for the extraordinary. Even so, her father's grand plans for her, tinged with paternal pride, never fully aligned with what she quietly yearned for: to stand on a stage or before a camera and embody fictional lives that offered an escape from her own emotional struggles. Sometimes parents see one dream, while a child sees another, and this dissonance can fuel even greater resolve. Ingrid was no exception. Tragedy knocked again when she was only 13. Her beloved father died of stomach cancer. Imagine being orphaned at such a vulnerable age, the light in your life snuffed out once more. Ingrid, who already knew too well what it felt like to lose a mother, was now completely without parents. For a time, she lived with an Aunt Ellen, only for heart disease to claim Ellen's life about 6 months later. Loss loomed over Ingrid's formative years like a permanent shadow, chasing away any sense of security she'd managed to build. Yet strangely, each heartbreak seemed to strengthen her drive to succeed. Acting became her lifeline, the place she could channel her sadness and longing into something creative, something that gave her purpose and a sense of stability she never quite found at home. By the time she was 14, she dipped a toe into the movie business, first as a film extra. She was still a teenager, unsure of where life might take her, but that small taste of professional acting might as well have been a revelation. Imagine the thrill of earning money for doing something you not only love, but something you feel born to do. That revelation was a watershed moment for Ingrid. It was no longer just daydreams or whispered fantasies. It was real. This was the period when she realized that make-believe could indeed be a viable career path, that this intangible desire coursing through her veins wasn't purely escapism. She was forging a path that would redefine how audiences worldwide perceived Hollywood femininity. Opportunity knocked louder when she was 17. She won a scholarship to Sweden's Royal Dramatic Theatre School. This was Sweden's premier institution for serious acting, a revered training ground. Yet the promise of 5 more years in a classroom felt stifling to someone who had already tasted the heady rush of being on a film set. Her instructors might have fretted that she was being impetuous, that she was squandering a brilliant theatrical education. But Ingrid couldn't wait. She needed real-world experience, not more hypothetical exercises. So she took her first speaking role in a film against her teacher's protests. In the eyes of some, she was throwing caution to the wind. But Ingrid's gut instincts told her that genuine set experience carried far more weight. Her gamble paid off, as within a short time, she landed more roles and found herself increasingly in demand in Swedish cinema. This rebellious streak, the same I know what's right for me attitude, would manifest itself in other aspects of her life when she was older, for better or for worse. If you can imagine a bustling set in the 1930s, with lighting rigs and cameras the size of small furniture, you can also picture the studio executives of that era fussing over Ingrid's look. Once her career gained momentum, studios had all sorts of suggestions. Change your name, restyle your hair, fix your teeth, basically strip away your identity to craft a more malleable star. Many aspiring actors at the time succumbed. Yet Ingrid stood her ground. She was Ingrid Bergman, and she would remain Ingrid Bergman. This refusal to bend to the commercial demands of the industry not only set her apart but also telegraphed a formidable sense of self. Where other new talents might have caved in, Ingrid was unyielding. It was a sign of internal steel that would define her entire life. As her Swedish films piled up accolades, bigger opportunities appeared on the horizon. Producer David O. Selznick, the Hollywood magnate behind Gone with the Wind, noticed Ingrid. He specifically wanted her for an English-language remake of Intermezzo. The year was 1939. Ingrid's English was shaky, but the lure of Hollywood was irresistible. She boarded a ship for America, leaving behind a husband, Petter Lindstrom, whom she had married at just 21, and their little baby daughter, Pia. At this juncture, Ingrid believed it was a temporary excursion, purely professional, after which she would return to Sweden. Except fate had other plans. When Intermezzo was released, Ingrid Bergman became an overnight sensation in Hollywood. Critics were enthralled by her naturalness. She was unlike so many of the polished starlets. She refused elaborate makeup or contrived mannerisms. Audiences found her authenticity captivating. In a world that often relied on illusions, Ingrid's sincerity felt like a breath of fresh air. Selznick recognized this quality and set about promoting her as a kind of luminous ingenue, Hollywood's new sweetheart. She looked ethereal on screen, simultaneously regal and approachable. It wasn't long before she was typecast in roles that emphasized purity, virtue, and sometimes even saintly devotion. On the surface, she played the good girl so convincingly that the public started to merge Ingrid's real identity with the characters she portrayed. If she was luminous and upright on screen, then surely she must be equally wholesome in real life, right? Yet Ingrid chafed under these constraints. She had ambitions that went beyond simply playing the virtuous leading lady. In 1941, she all but begged to portray a barmaid in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, determined to sink her teeth into something darker, grittier, and more morally complex. She yearned to stretch her range, to break away from the halo that Hollywood insisted on placing atop her head. It was also during this film's production that she embarked on a discreet affair with co-star Spencer Tracy. Though it never went public in their lifetimes, it foreshadowed Ingrid's pattern of romantic entanglements that seemed to spark on film sets. For a star minted as Hollywood's paragon of innocence, her off-screen pursuits were often anything but chaste. This duality, public saint versus private rebel, would soon erupt into one of Hollywood's most notorious scandals. Then came Casablanca in 1942. It's nearly impossible to talk about Ingrid Bergman without referencing this iconic film. The irony, of course, is that while modern audiences see it as one of cinema's crowning achievements, Ingrid herself didn't hold it in the same lofty regard. She famously considered it a standard job, overshadowed in her mind by other, more challenging roles. Yet Casablanca would cement her place in Hollywood lore forever, bridging the national tensions of World War II with a timeless love story. Here's Looking at You, Kid became a cultural touchstone, and Ingrid's face, soft, yearning, framed by a swirl of smoke in Rick's Café Américain, became as unforgettable as the film itself. Whether she liked it or not, Casablanca fused Ingrid Bergman's name with cinematic legend. In the wake of Casablanca, Ingrid's star soared, earning her an Oscar nomination for Whom the Bell Tolls in 1943. Co-star Gary Cooper fell for her behind the scenes, but Ingrid's pattern was to detach once filming ended, an approach that sometimes left her admirers baffled and heartbroken. Gary Cooper famously lamented that Ingrid vanished as soon as the camera stopped rolling, an echo of her earlier discreet liaison with Spencer Tracy. And yet, there was also photographer Robert Capa, whose mid-1940s entanglement with Ingrid was rumored to have been so passionate and adventurous that Alfred Hitchcock quietly borrowed elements of their dynamic for Rear Window. Hitchcock, who directed Ingrid in several films, saw something in her personal life that spoke volumes about secrecy and voyeurism, about the fine line between public persona and private reality. And from that intangible chemistry, some people say he formed the narrative spine of a film that is now considered a masterpiece. At this point, Ingrid was in a marriage that had turned into a hollow shell. Peter Lindstrom and Ingrid had tied the knot when she was just 21, and together they had Pia in 1938. But the demands of Hollywood kept Ingrid oceans away from her family for long stretches of time. From Lindstrom's perspective, she was always off filming, always away. In Ingrid's eyes, it may have felt as though the marriage was a vestige of a life that no longer fit her trajectory. Rumors circulated that Lindstrom stayed on largely due to Ingrid's financial success. Whatever the underlying truths, by the mid-1940s their relationship was rife with tension, made worse by Ingrid's clandestine romances. Hungering for an artistic challenge beyond Hollywood's illusions, Ingrid did something bold. She wrote a letter to Roberto Rossellini, the Italian neorealist director behind Rome, Open City, and Paisan. She declared her admiration for his raw, authentic style and offered to star in any film he might conceive. This was far from just fan mail. It was effectively Ingrid saying, "I need to break out of the Hollywood box, and I see you as my accomplice." Rossellini took up her offer and cast her in Stromboli, 1949. Suddenly, Ingrid traded the glitz of Los Angeles for the stark landscapes of post-war Italy. If you picture black volcanic rock and a rickety fishing village, you've got the setting of Stromboli. It was a world away from the manufactured glamour of the studio lot, and that was precisely the point. Then the rumors started. Was she doing the film for authenticity, or was it the magnetic pull of Rossellini himself? The whispers turned into a roar when it emerged that Ingrid was pregnant with Rossellini's child, even though she was still married to Lindstrom. This, in 1950, ignited a scandal so colossal that it dominated headlines internationally. Suddenly, Ingrid Bergman, once Hollywood's paragon of virtue, was labeled an adulteress. The fury was especially intense in the United States, where moral outrage manifested in open condemnations from the press and even the church. When she gave birth to Rossellini's son, the entire affair became public knowledge, and the backlash was swift and unforgiving. Petter Lindstrom, who felt humiliated, filed for divorce. Meanwhile, Senator Edwin C. Johnson inveighed against her on the Senate floor, making statements about moral turpitude and proclaiming that Ingrid Bergman should be barred from setting foot on American soil. It was a crucible moment. Here was the woman who had once played nuns and saintly heroines, now cast in the public eye as a home-wrecking Jezebel. Banished from Hollywood, Ingrid exiled herself to Italy, where she continued making films under Rossellini's direction. She married him, once free from Lindstrom, and together they had twin daughters, Isabella and Isotta, in 1952. Ingrid fully immersed herself in the neorealist movement, playing characters that bore little resemblance to the polished starlets of Tinseltown. Yet the artistry she had craved didn't translate into commercial success. Critics and audiences alike often found Rossellini's experiments too abstract or esoteric. Ingrid's international star began to wane. She was no longer the beloved sweetheart. She was an outcast. Rossellini's controlling tendencies, along with the relentless stress of their creative and personal partnership, only magnified the cracks in their marriage. As if karmic retribution were in full swing, Rossellini later had an affair with a married woman named Sonali Das Gupta. The heartbreak that Ingrid had once inflicted on others circled back to her. By 1957, the marriage to Rossellini ended in divorce. A year later, Ingrid married Lars Schmidt, a Swedish theatrical entrepreneur. He offered her a measure of calm and stability, something she had never truly experienced before. And around that same period, Hollywood extended an olive branch in the form of Anastasia, 1956. Originally undertaken while the scandal was still fresh, Anastasia proved a cinematic triumph. The public, perhaps exhausted by moralistic outrage or simply enchanted by the story, warmed to Ingrid again. In a dramatic twist, she won her second Oscar for that role. It was a homecoming of sorts, a signal that Hollywood and the American public were ready to embrace her anew, if not forget her transgressions. She had, after all, paid a high price for following her heart. Despite being welcomed back into the Hollywood fold, Ingrid chose to remain primarily in Europe with Schmidt. She traveled for film roles, but the rebellious aura she carried lingered. No longer was she simply that luminous ingenue. She was a seasoned actress who had defied societal conventions and survived. The marriage to Schmidt brought her more than a decade of relative peace. But as the 1960s bled into the 1970s, their relationship showed signs of strain. Ingrid's unstoppable drive often clashed with Schmidt's desire for a more balanced life. Nevertheless, she returned to the stage from time to time. Her passion project, Joan of Arc, resurfaced in different forms, including a 1970s production of Joan of Arc at the stake. Yes, even after all those controversies, Ingrid still wanted to embody saints, a testament to her fascination with layered, spiritually intense roles. But life had more trials in store. In 1973, Ingrid discovered a lump in her breast. Cancer. For anyone, that word is loaded with fear. For someone whose life's work depended on physical vitality, it might have felt like a death knell. Yet Ingrid pressed on. She appeared in Murder on the Orient Express, 1974, even as she quietly underwent surgeries and chemotherapy. She refused to let illness slow her down. It was almost as though her unstoppable determination was a kind of emotional muscle memory, one shaped by all the hardships of her youth. And as if that weren't enough pressure, her marriage to Schmidt also ended in divorce during this period. For many, that would be a signal to step away, to retreat, to heal. But Ingrid pressed forward, continuing to accept roles, continuing to chase the fulfillment that acting offered her. By the late 1970s, her cancer had metastasized, spreading throughout her body, affecting her vertebrae, her lungs, and making each day a painful ordeal. Even so, she never fully retired. In Autumn Sonata, 1978, she delivered a performance widely considered one of her most profound, acting opposite Liv Ullmann in a searing examination of a mother-daughter relationship. Audiences and critics alike marveled that Ingrid could summon such emotional intensity while grappling with immense physical suffering off screen. It was a testament not only to her talent, but to her unwavering commitment. No matter the personal cost, acting was her lifeblood. In 1982, at age 67, weakened by cancer, Ingrid still mustered the energy to see friends and even a few dignitaries from Sweden. Yet her condition deteriorated rapidly. On her birthday, August 29th of that year, she passed away with ex-husband Lars Schmidt by her side in London. Her final day on Earth neatly coincided with the day she first entered it, like some cosmic script that brought the curtain down at a profoundly poetic moment. But Ingrid's story didn't simply fade into the night. Even after her death, controversy and revelations clung to her legacy like a stubborn perfume. Her ex-husband, Peter Lindström, now free from any sense of marital loyalty, unleashed bitter interviews, suggesting that Ingrid was self-absorbed and only interested in people who could entertain her or advance her career. Did that ring true, or was it the venting of a wounded man? Then the name Robert Capa resurfaced, and details of their secretive romance emerged, adventures across war-torn Europe, clandestine trysts that neither boasted about publicly. And then came the jaw-dropping 1987 confession from Gregory Peck, who admitted he and Ingrid had had an intense affair during the filming of Spellbound in 1945. The revelations felt endless, layer upon layer of personal history that Ingrid had never fully disclosed while alive. Amidst these posthumous bombshells, one couldn't ignore the toll it took on her daughter, Pia. Growing up, Pia witnessed her mother's absences, her mother's affairs, and the subsequent scandals that enveloped them. Though Pia eventually forgave Ingrid, theirs was a relationship haunted by distance and misunderstanding. Publicly, many might have idolized Ingrid as a luminous star, but privately, the dynamic between mother and child was fraught with the kind of unresolved tensions that plague countless families, only magnified under the glare of worldwide scrutiny. And yet, as decades passed, the narrative around Ingrid shifted once more. Historians, critics, and fans began to see her notorious scandal with Rossellini in a different light. She challenged the moral constraints of her era, especially for women in Hollywood. She had flung aside her saintly image to pursue genuine, artistic, and emotional fulfillment, paying a steep price in the court of public opinion. But in doing so, she contributed to a broader dialogue about personal autonomy, about a woman's right to carve out her destiny, even if it shocks the system. By the 1990s, TV specials and documentaries began exploring Ingrid's legacy with a more nuanced lens. They highlighted her astonishing range, from Swedish neo-realist films to big Hollywood productions, from heartfelt Broadway performances to playing everything from battered wives to nuns. Younger audiences discovered her diaries and letters, found themselves fascinated by her unwavering ambition, an ability to defy the patriarchal norms that once tried to constrain her. Scholars pointed to the tension between her public persona and private rebellions, suggesting it was this friction that gave her performances such palpable emotional weight. Her final works, like Autumn Sonata, remain landmarks in cinematic acting. Those who watch it can hardly believe she was in the advanced stages of cancer, fighting unimaginable pain while delivering scenes that cut to the core of human relationships. That was Ingrid Bergman in a nutshell, propelled by an inner flame that refused to be snuffed out, no matter how bleak the circumstances. But perhaps her largest legacy is the complex mosaic of who she was. Some see her as a cautionary tale about the price of fame. Others celebrate her as a boundary breaker who refused to let social mores dictate her life. She stands, after all, as the only actress to have won multiple Oscars amid such unrelenting controversy, only to stage a triumphant career renaissance that led to an outpouring of public adoration. In a sense, she embodied both the best and worst sides of the Hollywood dream, exalted on pedestals one moment, castigated the next, always pushing forward despite heartbreak and public backlash. Ingrid Bergman defied expectations at every turn, facing exile, heartbreak, and illness, only to rise again with unshakable grace. Her legacy is more than just awards or classic roles. It's the story of a woman who chose authenticity over approval, even when the world turned against her. What's your favorite Ingrid Bergman performance? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell for more unforgettable stories from Hollywood's golden age.